mean, it's like that, so I mean, it will definitely get you. It's the bottom of the screen.
Have you seen me launch before?
How do you run around? That's alright, that's okay. I mean, it will pick up the sound.
Do you get?
Yeah, we have that.
Oh,
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to tropical London. I think, if we are lucky, this is the only time we are in this room. Okay. So it's just Goldsmiths has no large rooms, or very few large rooms that can take 150 students. So try not to breathe very much, okay? I'm being serious. So this session is an introduction to the sessions that you have on Thursday afternoon called Interpreting Images, and my name is Gary. This is the only time we will meet all together for Interpreting Images. In the following 7 or 8 weeks, you will meet in your classes, okay? But as I say, this is just an introduction to some of the ideas that you're going to meet, and Roland Barthes in particular, and his ideas of semiology. So, my talk, as in every good presentation, is divided into two parts. In the first part, I'll give you a little bit of theory and then go on to give some examples of interpreting images. So, the first question, of course, you should ask is, why are we looking at images and why are we interpreting them? And this is my justification. As, remember, don't put your notebooks down, put the books down, don't look at the books. You can look at the books in a moment. Okay. There are three reasons why there's this course. The first, as was mentioned yesterday in the postmodernities class, is to do with this idea of, what's his name? Jameson's idea of the post-industrial society. How Western societies have become post-industrial. They rely more on services. And central to part of that is the centrality of images. Images are important. They surround us everywhere. And then meanings become, well, lost. They become neutralized and naturalized. And the second reason for looking at images is to actually try and use some of the theory that you meet in postmodernities, in art history, and in film. Because your tutors can tell you all the theory you like, but it doesn't actually mean anything unless you can actually apply it. And that's why the third justification is the opportunity for speaking and critical thinking. The idea is that colleges like Goldsmiths, the only way your tutors can see that you're engaging with these ideas is by you speaking. And we're giving you the content, we're giving you the theory, the tools with which to look at these images and play with the ideas that you're presented with, whether that's Barthes, Foucault, Said, or whoever. But the focus today is on Roland Barthes and mythologies. And I'm afraid, now is your opportunity to open up your book, because I have very generously, on the first page, there's a course description and what you do each week. But also, because I'm such a wonderful, kind human being, there's also copies of the slides. Okay, so you might want to...
Yes, yes. Oh, thank you.
You...
More. Thank you very much.
So I strongly suggest that you take notes, because the first question your tutor is going to ask you next week when you do feedback on this is, show me your notes. All right. This also works for the art history, film, and postmodernities. And if you're really good, you bring in your laptop or your iPad, and you can actually bring it up and take your notes electronically. Or do it the old-fashioned way. This is the old-fashioned way of actually printing the notes out. It's a really good idea. If you're lucky on your degree programs, your tutor will put all the notes up on the VLE, and you can actually print it out before the lecture. So you have some idea of what's going on when you're in the lecture, all right? Okay, Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes, you cannot escape Roland Barthes. And there are lots of, Roland Barthes wrote lots and lots of books. For example, A Lover's Discourse, which apparently is a book everyone must read in their 20s. If you're interested in photography, he wrote the book on photography, the Camera Lucida. Again, you cannot escape the Camera Lucida. It's the book on photography written by Roland Barthes. Next week, with Ivor in Postmodernities, you're doing Death of the Author. Again, Roland Barthes, another book you cannot escape. Even if you don't read it, you need to be aware of it. But we're doing this one, Mythologies. And Mythologies is all about looking at images. That's what I want to say. The significance of this book, and this book is written in 1957. That date is important for reasons you'll understand later, is that Roland Barthes is the first person to look at the banal, boring, everyday images that you see around you every day. So the advertisements on the internet, on magazines, on the bus, which when you see them, do you think about them? No, that's right. They pass by you 1 second and they're gone. But Roland Barthes is significant because he is literally the first person who, perhaps rather boringly, sits down and starts thinking about what these images are doing, what potential interpretations or understandings there are with these images. And why does Barthes focus on the mass media? And as I've already mentioned, Barthes is interested because in many ways these images are presented as being natural and neutral. And the purpose of this analysis is to challenge the idea of the innocence or naturalness of the texts around us. Notice he uses this word text because you know text as in the written word, but he uses texts for any image because he argues that anything that can be read is a text. So an advertisement or a commercial or a film is just a text, like a book, which can be read and interpreted. I have to think about my words because some of my words are misleading. Barthes argues that in fact the reason for studying, examining these images, as I've mentioned, is that they aren't neutral. They are not innocent. And he uses this term myth, referring to a fictitious, unproven or illusory thing. If you look at myth in your electronic dictionary, it might talk about Greek, in the Western tradition, Greek and Roman stories from thousands of years ago. But this isn't talking about stories from 1,000 years ago. It's talking about the stories, the narratives that shape our lives today, that give meaning to our lives, provide us with meanings on how we understand the world, how our world is shaped. Yes. And how does he do this? He does this in this book, Mythologies, through the study of signs. And the study of signs is called semiology. Oh, I don't want to use that slide. So, what is a sign? A sign can be divided into the signifier and the signified. These ideas are based on the ideas of linguistics. But Barthes is not that interested in linguistics. But he does like these ideas. So the signifier is what you see. But it could be what you hear or what you smell. But for this course, it's what you see. And the signified is the concept. And together, they form the sign. And therefore, our world is a whole system of signs. And he argues that these can be read as text. So, this nice quotation from Barthes. We therefore inhabit a world of signs that support an existing power structure and system of values, which at the same time claim to be natural and neutral. So he's arguing that these texts, these images that you see, are not natural and neutral. That they have an underlying system of values, Foucault would call them power relations, but that's going into the 1980s. Okay. The key point is nothing is neutral. Everything is ideological. So to help with these descriptions of these images, Barthes also introduces this vocabulary, denotation and connotation. The first level of signification is the literal meaning. It's literally what you see. I'll give you examples of this in a moment. It's quite theory-like, but it's much easier when I show you the actual example. So the denotation is just literally what you see. A woman drinking a Coca-Cola bottle. A boy playing football. That's not the interesting part. The more interesting part is the second level, the connotation, which is what he also refers to as myths. Okay, the beliefs and values, if you like, which underlie the denotation. All right? The key words to remember, denotation and connotation. Connotation you probably know already. But there's a but. Okay. And the but is that the relationship between the signifier and the signifier is arbitrary. Now, arbitrary just means not fixed. So, if this relationship is not fixed, it means that meaning becomes not fixed. The images that we are surrounded by are cultural products and reflect certain values and structures within a particular society. So what gives meaning in one particular society may not have the same meaning in another society. Okay, I know this may seem obvious, but you also have to think about what you're being told about modernity. Okay, so this is saying that it differs, it allows for plurality. Again, something which Ivor was talking about yesterday. This is the important thing, and it's reflected in the syllabus. When we start this program, you look at advertising because you're selling something and you want someone to buy it. Buy Coca-Cola. Go away and get a Coke. What happens is that when you start looking at other things, meaning becomes much more ambiguous. And it certainly becomes ambiguous when you start looking at things across cultures. Okay. And this is something that you need to think about how relevant or useful these ideas that you're meeting in post-modernities and Goldsmiths generally are to you personally, but to your culture as well. Okay, you literally have to think about how relevant these ideas are or not. So, right, I'm going to put this book down now. I'm going to give you a nice example. I'm not going to give you a bad example. This is the example which Roland Barthes actually refers to. And, of course, there's a story here. Roland Barthes is having his hair cut. So he's sitting down and he's waiting to have his hair cut. And when you have your hair cut, God, you're amazingly late. And when you're having your hair cut, what do you normally do? Yeah, you read a magazine. So Roland Barthes is sitting there, waiting to have his hair cut, reading a magazine. And this is the magazine that he reads. They're escaping left, right, and centre. So this is the magazine that he reads. Now, to understand this image, you need to know a little bit about the background of what's happening in France in the mid-1950s. So Paris Match, very popular magazine in Paris in the mid-1950s. In the 1950s, the British and French empires are falling apart, okay? People want their independence. So Roland Barthes picks up this magazine, he looks at the image, and in terms of the denotation, what do you see? The denotation, remember, is literally what you see. And here you have a young boy. How old would you say he is? Yeah, 10, I don't know, 10, 12, 15, something like this. The point is, he's young. And he's wearing what looks like a military uniform. Okay, the colour is the sort of colour that soldiers wear. And he's wearing, well again, this is a sort of French uniform, a French hat. And he's saluting. And he's looking over here, so he's saluting. So he looks like, almost like a boy soldier saluting into the distance. This is the denotation, okay? It's rather boring. It's the literal description of what you can see. However, of course, it's the connotation that's far more interesting. The first thing you have to think about is why. Remember, the French Empire is falling apart. The colonial countries are trying to get their independence. So here, and again, in France there's lots of colonies in Africa. So you notice that the colonized are presented as a boy, not as a man. Because obviously normally, actually that's an oversimplification, but normally you would expect a man to be a soldier, wouldn't you? But the person taking this photograph has decided to choose a boy. Now that's interesting. The second thing that's interesting is that he is saluting. And of course, what you think is, what is he saluting? What is he saluting, do you think? Yes, you're right, but literally, what is he saluting? Yes, but how do you show the French government? It's through, the French flag. You know, in some cultures, at school, you get up in the morning, you salute, or do stand up. In America, for instance, they like doing that. So here, he's saluting the French flag, even though you can't see it. And yes, it's a symbol of the French government, power, that sort of thing. So in terms of the connotation, in terms of the myth might be that the French Empire, that all parts of the French Empire support the French Empire. This is, in all the far distant corners of the French Empire, they are loyal to the French Empire. Okay. But interestingly, the fact that this is a boy is important, because especially when you see how the foreign other is presented, it's often as a child or as a woman, and you'll see this a lot. Now you might say, well, yeah, sounds fascinating. This is from 1955. What's this got to do with anything today? And because you could argue you can still use these ideas with more contemporary advertising. And why do you look for the picture? Okay. So this is an advertisement for a perfume by TKNY, and this is from a few years ago. The advertisement is still running, but this is one from a few years ago. At the level of denotation, well, it's again very straightforward. I want to make the point though, these are images that you look at literally for a second. This is an image from a woman's magazine, and usually, if you're buying a woman's magazine, you're not saying, gosh, that's a really good advertisement from DKNY, I must do a semiotic analysis of this. You're going through it quickly to whatever article you're reading. The reason why images like this are so dangerous is because people don't think about them. Okay, you have to keep reminding yourself that. These are banal images. Banal just meaning everyday, that we see and don't think about. And that's what makes them dangerous. No one is sitting there doing an analysis of this thing. So at the level of denotation, you have a young woman looking to camera. She's just enjoyed a nice big green apple. And what is she doing? Well, she's not doing very much. She's just looking out. And around her are these big green apples. And these represent the perfume bottle. It's the shape of a silver apple. So at the level of denotation, absolutely, it's just not very interesting. However, the connotation is more interesting. And there's a lot you can say about this image. I mean, the first thing you notice, of course, is that it's in 3 parts. And you see the predominant colour green. And of course, the colour green is significant. It represents freshness, newness, innocence, that kind of stuff. But I think when you look at this image, your eye is directed to the woman, not the apples. And again, you're looking at the woman. And the woman, well, the woman is interesting. She has long hair, but it's not tidy. Now remember, DKNY have paid the advertisers hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, they didn't say, here's 20 pence, could you do me an advertisement to go into Cosmopolitan? You know, someone has sat down with a medium comms degree from Goldsmiths College and worked out every detail. Okay, and they know their own cards. So, and they're playing with it. So, look at the woman. Long hair, not short hair, not tidy hair, untidy hair. Okay, she's got greeny blue eyes, it matches the apples. Her mouth is slightly open. You'll notice that in many of these images, women can't close their lips. Their lips are always slightly open. You'll also notice there's a gap in her teeth. They could have chosen, that is significant. They could have chosen a model with no gap in her teeth. But a lot of these models have gaps in their teeth, and that's significant. She's holding her hand like this, and she's just bitten the apple. Okay, so what kind of woman is she? Now you could say to me, oh, she's a strong woman. She's looking at the camera. But is she looking at you in the same way I'm looking at you? No, no. Okay, so, well, yeah, you could actually say. Okay, I would argue one interpretation is that this is a seductive pose. This is not a strong pose. This is not a strong woman looking directly. It's a seductive one. And I can support myself by saying, of course, if you bring, again, Western mythology of Adam and Eve in the story of creation, it is Eve who eats of the apple of knowledge. So Eve in the Bible is the bad woman because she gets Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. Bad woman. Okay. And clearly you could argue this is a bad woman, seducing. Well, because who is the viewer? Where would you expect to find this image? In a men's magazine or a woman's magazine? Woman's magazine. This is from a woman's magazine, not a man's magazine. We can have a discussion about this later. But it's from a woman's magazine. And who is the assumed viewer? You said men's magazine because who is the assumed viewer? The assumed viewer is a man. And as Ivor is going to go on to discuss, in many ways, meaning in the West is through binaries. So here you have an assumed male viewer, and who is looking at the female in the image, which I'm going to describe as not male. The assumed male viewer is doing the viewing. The woman is receiving that view, the gaze. Not male viewer to be viewed. And so what happens is you have what's called this binary being established. And it is the binary that establishes meaning. Male, viewer, Which one would you prefer to be? This side or this side? Would you prefer to be doing the viewing, or do you prefer to be the one who is viewed? Yes. Because that one is the active one. This is passive. So what you have here is an example of binary opposition. The image looks neutral. There's nothing special about this image. It's just a boring advertisement for perfume. There's billions of them. They all look like this in some shape or form. But when you start to analyze it and think about the relationship between the viewer and the to be viewed, you'll notice that this relationship is not equal. This image is not neutral. This image is not, well, the image naturalizes certain views about the role of men and women within Western society. And I'm sure you're going to say, Gary, that's a very, very big statement to make from one image. But the point is, it's reflected again and again and again when you start looking at images and deconstructing them, breaking them down. There's more stuff going on here as well, because the advertisement, here we go. If you don't believe that the woman is to be, is passive, it's even spelt for you. Be delicious. Be delicious. And if something is delicious, what do you do with it? You eat it. And what's another way of saying eating? Good. Louder. Yeah, you consume it. So here, literally, the male viewer is invited to consume the female to be viewed in this image. Yeah. It's not a neutral image. Although the advertiser will say, yeah, it's perfectly normal. Every woman wants to look like this. Do you want to look like this? So be delicious. Be consumed. Now that's interesting, because the advertisement, and it's actually cut, is for DKNY, Donna, New York. And here you have, the skyscrapers of New York. And New York is the center of what? It's not the capital of America, but it's certainly the... Huh? Oh, yeah, that whole Big Apple. Tell me later about the Big Apple. Okay, why is New York important? Why is it significant? Why were the Twin Towers in New York destroyed? What does New York represent? Yeah, it's the center of capitalism, of Western capitalism. What does Western capitalism do? It consumes. It's part of the consumer industry, well, service industry, it's reliance on images. So that's really quite interesting. It's almost ironic. You've also got the image, of course, that, and this is something you're going to do with Ivor as well, you've got these nice phallic symbols. The skyscrapers, nice phalluses. Yeah, we'll do this later with Ivor later. So this image, which as I've said, you will not spend even a second looking at in a magazine, is actually not neutral, not normal. Well, it is. It becomes normalized. Do you think about it? No, we don't. We just accept it. It has an innocence. But it doesn't really. It reflects very much Western society. And in this case, the role of women within a Western consumer capitalist economy.
Sorry, can I just ask a question about this? So, obviously, the person who designed it is trying to make the viewer empathise with this. I mean, the idea that it's a male game, but yet it's designed for women.
question which you can bring up with your lecturers next week. I don't want to go about routes today. Okay? So if you're ever in a presentation and you want to avoid the question, you say, very good question. I will deal with that next week. And now, because I want a little bit of a break, now some of my students might be familiar with this image. And of course, if you've got green apples, oh yes, of course, someone mentioned apple. The big apple is New York. So there's another joke going on with this image. If you've got green apples, why not have red apples? So here is an example, obviously a slightly different one, of this DKNY commercial. For 2 minutes, have a think. Have a look at this image and think about how you would analyze it. Obviously, it has many similarities with the previous image that you've seen. again, this is the sort of thing that you will be doing in the sessions in the afternoon. But there's a lot going on in this image. And again, what's interesting is that there's nothing interesting about this image. It's something that you would look at, not even for a second, as you're at the bookstore going through your magazine. And so you say to yourself, I'm going straight into the connotation, I'm not interested in the denotation. But the connotation is, well, where do you look? Where does the advertiser force you to look?
The woman.
Yeah, the woman. And there's actually a triangle between her eyes, coming down to the motorbike, and across here. And in the centre are the words Red Delicious, the name of the product that's being sold. Okay. You also then have to say, notice again, I mean, you've got the stuff, she's eating the apple. She's also looking straight to camera. Okay, again, we can talk about male gaze. The other thing is, does this woman have power? Does she have more power than the previous woman I showed you?
Yes.
No. Well, why do you say no? No, I agree with you, but why do you say no?
The first one seems more active, but this one seems more passive.
In what way?
Because the first woman just look at the camera.
Yeah.
She has the power to say, look at me. And this one just seems like be consumed by the camera.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. Because I would agree with you. Because no woman is going to ride a big Harley Davidson dressed like that. Because you're going to look like a complete idiot within about 10 seconds. She's not, you know she's not going to ride that bike. She's sitting there, it's almost like decoration. Technically, she's in the driving seat, but no woman is going to go cycling anywhere in that dress. So that's interesting. Okay. What else was I going to say about this? Well, of course, if you're really mad, which I am, and you've got an hour to spare, because I gave this image to a group of students to actually analyse in an exam, I actually sat there and started analysing all the stuff that's going on here. And it's all stuff that we've already talked about in a little bit of detail. This is the sort of stuff you're going to be doing for the next 7 weeks or 8 weeks. Thinking about where the advertiser wants you to look. The advertiser doesn't want you to look here or up there. The advertiser wants you to look at specific parts of this image. And then you start thinking about, I told you about Adam and Eve and the idea of temptation and the apple. The two apples, what have I got here that's interesting? There's male gaze, male-female binary, but are they equal? Because I would argue they're not equal. I still think the male dominates. And it's male gaze again. Of course, there's the significance of the red colour. And red, of course, doesn't necessarily have the same meaning across cultures. In Western culture, it has things like lust, violence, romance, trying to think of other red blood, this sort of stuff. That may not necessarily be the same. Remember, if you're an advertiser, you're being paid a lot of money to sell DKNY perfume. You want to make sure it works. And I say people have been thinking about colour for years now. And this is something you need to think about how successful this might be if this image was shown in China or Korea or wherever. Yes. That's good. Yeah. Wow. I was really bored actually, because it was either I might as well do this with the students. I made all these notes. But I've been thinking about this stuff for a while. But as I've mentioned, an aspect that you need to think about is the degree, the extent to which this works across cultures. And it's a little bit complicated with globalization, and like a lot of the people who may be doing the advertising in your company may have gone to New York or Britain or wherever to actually train. But this is a Korean advertisement for It's an alcoholic fruit juice. I think it's quite popular in Korea. And what's interesting is that from a Western point of view, this doesn't look, in many ways I can look at this and try and analyse it, but there's parts of it which are not Western, if you know what I mean, which I'll explain. I mean, there's the use of the colour red again. Does that have the same significance as West? I think probably yes, if you're looking at Koreans. But it's unusual in the West to see all this back. Usually, in just the two examples I've shown you, in Western advertising, when you see women, it tends to be the front, tends not to be back. And in fact, I don't think I've actually seen any Western advertising showing the back like this. That's quite unusual. That strikes me about this image. What else strikes me about this image? Oh, the Koreans I've spoken to about this image have said, this woman has an interesting body shape. That someone, the advertiser, has gone in, made her back longer and her hips wider. Okay, it's interesting. It's interesting because, again, you've got the colour green here. Green, freshness, clean, purity, all of this kind of stuff. You've got the beautiful woman. Again, ideas of beauty are not universal. So this is why I think there's the back here on this image. And obviously, just in case you had any doubt about the meaning, where is the bottle of alcoholic fruit juice placed? Okay, it becomes highly sexualized. It's very much about almost like fertility. And speaking to Korean students, they've told me the kind of places this would be found would be in bars as well. So, quite culturally specific. Yes, there's stuff which male gaze. In terms of Western theory, I can talk to you about male gaze. Who is the assumed viewer? They're male. Who's active, who's passive? She's avoiding the male gaze, for instance. But I can still talk about colour. I can still talk about the use of the greens and the reds. Again, it's a bit interesting being told about Korean women's body shapes, that something is happening in that image. Well, they told me that no Korean woman has this body shape. Phew. And here is another one, which, again, I seem to be talking about fruit juices. This is a Taiwanese advertisement for banana juice. And I have been told that this translates for, these bananas are so sad, they're going to hang themselves. Now, there's, well, that is, I think the Taiwanese person who showed me said, this is a bit shocking even in Taiwan, okay? But worse than that is, again, in Western theory, bananas are phallic shapes. Again, for me, I feel uncomfortable looking at this image. Okay, and we need to talk about Freud and phallic symbolism, but here you have a banana about to lose its life. Very unhappy about this. In fact, I feel, as I say, I'm going to move on because I don't like looking at this image. Now, I don't like looking at this image either. This is a Japanese advertisement. Now, it's important, it's a Japanese advertisement for Muji for the Japanese audience, not a Western audience. Okay? This is important. Muji is famous because it makes this beautiful stationery, and everything is very neat and tidy. So you go into a Muji shop, it's perfect. Everything is arranged beautifully. And they also make jumpers. And as you see in this image, it's beautifully arranged. It's beautifully arranged in this box. So for the Japanese, no problem. But from a Western perspective, do you think this would work in the West? Why not?
It looks like a coffin.
It looks like a coffin. It looks like a dead jumper. Its arms crossed, put into a box, and then soon it's going to be buried. Because, of course, the Japanese do not have the tradition of burying bodies. They have cremation. So, again, if you're an advertiser and we're planning on using this image in the UK, well, you know, it would be unusual. Okay. So, what I've tried to show you so far is the point about the theory that you're looking at should not be regarded as historical. It's something that should be applied in your everyday life, to the point where you look at literally everything and think about why it is the way that it is. Now, this is an advertisement that was at Goldsmiths, and it's an advertisement for the Royal Literary Fellows. The Royal Literary Fellows are people that help students with their English essays. And as I say, this is a real advertisement. This was at Goldsmiths. And you have to think, who is this advertisement for? And the answer is, it's aimed at you. Okay. Now, you know, it's basically saying, do you want help with your essays? Go and see these people. That's the message. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part, for me, going to connotation, is how the international student is presented. Now, you'll notice here, the international student is feminized. You'll notice that in this group, yes, it's dominated by women, but there are also men. So it's being reduced down to female. It's being reduced to a girl. Remember the advertisement from Parry Match of the black soldier? How again, it's the foreign other. The foreign other is turned into a child or feminized. Here, the foreign other is also presented as a manga cartoon, Japanese-style cartoon. And you'll also notice, as with manga, she's dressed like a waitress or a maid. And again, the connotation here, because you're laughing, because it's the idea of this image has become sexualized. Now, I'll just read you the text, because the text is quite interesting as well. So, one day in Dr. Pemberton's class, the essay is due next Tuesday. No excuses. Yeah, Kitty, I get to write an essay. But later that night, gosh, as of course, gosh, I don't know what to write about. What should I do? I know, I'll go to see the Royal Literary Fellowship Fellow. They always give me great advice. The next day, outside the Fellow's office, that's all I need to do. But that's so easy. Wow, I'm glad I came in. Now, there's lots of interesting things. The point about this is that it tells you more about the person who created it than the person it's aimed at. So immediately as you see this, who do you think has created this? A man or a woman? It's been produced by men. Okay, it's quite, well, actually, it's quite bad, because it's both racist and I would argue very sexist. Okay, it's portraying international students as the feminized other, literally as children, because Dr. Pemberton, what is he, a man or a woman?
No.
He's going to be a man. And what else? That's daft about this image. Of course it's just daft that you come and see me and I go, ping, and you can now write your essay. But the point I want to make, as with all this advertising, is not so much what it shows, but what it shows you about the culture in which it's produced. Okay, this is important, especially when you start moving on to stuff which is more ambiguous, like artwork or film, which we do on the program. Okay, so I got the students to complain and take them down, because especially at a place like Goldsmiths, that shouldn't be allowed. Right, I'm finished. Well, yeah, that's perfect timing from my point of view. Right. Any easy and obvious questions? Good. That's what I hoped for. So, in the syllabus, what will happen is, for the first few weeks, the ideas that you meet in post-modernities relating to art next week, you will meet both with either in post-modernities and with understanding images, and then Foucault and Said. Okay. So it all becomes reflexive. So all the ideas you meet, you can try and bring up in the lecture. By the way, you've got some homework. This is important. I want you, for your next class, to bring an image. And I suggest you bring an advertisement, because advertisements are an easier place to start. So for your class next Thursday, bring an image. Bring an advertisement. And when I say bring a good advertisement, an advertisement you can talk about. Don't bring an image and you look at it and say, I don't know what to say. That's not useful. Try to choose something where usually images which have people are easier to talk about, because you can talk about the relationship between the viewer and the person being viewed. My other advice to you is, if you've got a laptop or a tablet or an iPad, bring it. Because the thing about this is that these images work best in colour, because obviously the colour is significant. And sometimes you might want to show later on part of a video or something. But I strongly suggest, I mean, your mobile phone is okay, but obviously it's a bit small. But if you have something slightly larger, bring it. Because it also saves money, that you don't have to print something out in colour. You know? Is there anything else?